Jack Simmons had been a cop for over 20 years, and in all those years, he had one rule. Certain people didn't belong in certain neighborhoods. At least, that's what he believed. The cop with a hidden agenda, Jack, wasn't the kind of cop who used slurs openly or made headlines for racism. No, he was smarter than that. His discrimination was subtle, untraceable. He had stopped dozens of black men over the years for looking suspicious, for fitting a description, for driving the wrong kind of car in the wrong part of town. And when the complaints rolled in, Jack knew how to cover his tracks, body cam accidentally off. No physical evidence of abuse, just enough legal jargon to make it look like a routine stop. He was untouchable, and he knew it. That night, Jack was patrolling the upscale district, a place full of gated mansions, private driveways, and old money families. It was quiet, just the way he liked it, until a sleek black Mercedes glided down the street. Jack's eyes narrowed. The driver, young, black, alone. Jack gripped the wheel tighter. A black kid driving a car like that in this neighborhood? No way. Jack's jaw tensed. In his mind, there were only two possibilities: stolen car, drug dealer, either way. Jack had found his next stop. He flicked on the red and blue lights. The siren wailed. The Mercedes slowed to a stop. And Jack smirked. Tonight was just another routine traffic stop. Or at least, that's what he thought. Because in just a few minutes, his entire career would come crashing down. Red and blue lights flashed. The sirens screamed through the quiet upscale neighborhood. Jack gripped the wheel, his pulse steady, his smirk growing. The Mercedes slowed, then stopped. Jack didn't waste a second. He threw open his door, his boots slamming against the pavement as he marched toward the driver's side. In his mind, this was already a done deal. A young black man, alone, driving a car worth more than most people's houses. There was only one explanation. Stolen. The driver's window rolled down. Inside sat a young man, no older than his mid-20s. Calm, collected, dressed in a tailored suit, a luxury watch glinting under the streetlights. "Good evening, officer," the young man said smoothly, his voice controlled but firm. Jack's jaw clenched. There was no panic, no guilt, just confidence. Jack hated that. "License and registration," he snapped. The young man didn't even flinch. "May I ask why I'm being pulled over?" Jack's blood boiled. That tone, that attitude, how dare this kid act like he had rights? Jack didn't answer. Instead, he went straight for escalation. "Out of the car!" Jack barked. The young man's brows furrowed slightly. "Sir, Jack yanked the door open. "I said get out! Hands up, now!" Before the young man could react, Jack grabbed his arm, jerking him out of the car with force. The young man stumbled, his expensive dress shoes scraping against the pavement. And then Jack shoved him hard, right onto the cold concrete. The young man winced but didn't resist. Jack pressed his knee into his back, one hand gripping his wrist, the other hovering over his gun. His voice was sharp, aggressive, filled with misplaced authority. "You think you can just waltz into this neighborhood with a stolen car?" The young man exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening. Jack didn't notice, didn't care. He was too busy feeling powerful. Until the young man spoke. His voice was low, calm. "Unshaken, officer," Jack scoffed. "You're under arrest, punk." But then the young man turned his head slightly, and with absolute certainty he said, "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." Jack froze. For the first time tonight, a tiny sliver of doubt crept into his mind. Jack wasn't done. After forcing the young man onto the pavement, he yanked open the car door, rifling through the interior. He needed evidence, something, anything, to justify what he had just done. A bag of drugs, a gun, even an expired registration would do. But the car was pristine, spotless. Jack's frustration grew. This kid was too calm, too collected, and Jack hated it. "Let me make a call." Pinned against the pavement, the young man spoke softly. "Officer," he said, steady and composed. "Can I make a call?" Jack snorted. "You think you get a phone call? What, you got a lawyer on speed dial?" The young man's lips curved slightly. "No, I just need to call my father." Jack's eyes rolled. This was classic. Every punk he'd ever arrested had the same excuse. "You don't know who I am? My dad's a lawyer. You're gonna regret this." Jack had heard it all. But this time he laughed outright. "Oh yeah?" Jack mocked, pressing his knee harder against the young man's back. "And who's your dad, huh?" The young man turned his head slightly, eyes locking onto Jack's. His expression, zero fear, zero doubt. "Chief Simmons," he said simply. "My father is the chief of police." Jack froze. For the first time that night, a chill ran down his spine. He snorted again, but it felt forced now. "Liar," he muttered. "There's no way." And then the young man's phone buzzed on the pavement. Jack's instincts kicked in. He snatched it up before the kid could grab it, and that's when he saw it. Incoming call. "Dad, police chief." Jack's stomach dropped. His hands went cold. The screen glowed in the dark, taunting him. This wasn't a bluff. This wasn't some punk kid with an attitude. This was the only person in the entire city who could end his career with a single phone call. And Jack, he had just slammed the chief's son into the ground, pulled a gun on him, and falsely accused him of a crime. His career was over, and in less than 10 minutes, his boss was about to arrive. 10 minutes later, chaos arrived. Jack stood frozen, his mind racing, his heartbeat pounding like a war drum. The phone in his hand was still buzzing, the words, "Dad," "Police Chief," glowing on the screen like a death sentence. And then, screeching tires, engines roaring. 5 police cars flooded the street. The flashing red and blue lights painted the entire neighborhood in chaos. Jack's hands turned clammy as he saw who stepped out first. A tall, broad-shouldered man in full uniform slammed his car door shut. His boots hit the pavement hard, and his face pure, unfiltered rage. Every single officer on scene froze, because this wasn't just any cop. This was Police Chief Samuel Simmons, and Jack had just assaulted his only son. "Jack, let him go now!" The chief's roar shook the street. Jack stumbled backward, nearly dropping the phone. Sir, I didn't know." "Shut up." The chief marched forward, his voice shaking with rage and disgust. His eyes burned into Jack with a fury that made every officer in the area step back. "You had my son on the ground." His voice was low, controlled, dangerous. "You pointed your gun at his head." Jack tried to breathe. He opened his mouth. I was just doing my job, sir." Your job?" The chief lunged forward, grabbing Jack by the collar. Jack gasped, feet nearly leaving the ground. "Your job?" The chief's voice shook with fury. "Your job is to protect this city, not target black men for existing." Jack's knees buckled. The other officers stood silent, stunned. They had seen Jack abuse his power before. But now, he had finally picked the wrong victim. The chief's grip tightened on Jack's collar. "You think you can keep getting away with this?" Jack's breath hitched. He had never seen the chief like this before. The chief turned to his officers. His voice was firm, final. "Cuff him." Jack's heart stopped. No, this couldn't be happening. One of his own fellow officers stepped forward, eyes cold. "Jack Simmons," he said, "you are under arrest for excessive force, racial profiling, and abuse of authority." Click! The cold steel of handcuffs snapped around Jack's wrists, the same cuffs he had used on so many innocent people. And now, he was the one wearing them. The street was silent. No one spoke, because in that moment, Jack Simmons wasn't a cop anymore. He was just another criminal. For years, he abused his power. Now, he was forced to kneel before the very people he oppressed. Jack's legs shook. The cold pavement beneath him felt like fire against his skin. Sweat dripped down his face. His wrists burned from the tight handcuffs. And standing above him was the one man he feared most, Police Chief Samuel Simmons, his boss, his judge, his executioner, and next to him, the young man Jack had just brutalized, his son. Jack couldn't look him in the eyes, but the chief, He wasn't done. Look him in the eye and apologize. Jack's throat tightened. He had spent years getting away with this, stopping people for no reason, forcing them to kneel on the streets while he played God. And now, he was the one on his knees. You think I don't know what you've been doing? The chief growled, voice dripping with fury. Jack swallowed hard. You've spent your whole damn career hunting men who look like my son. His voice grew louder. You thought you were untouchable. Jack's breath hitched. But tonight, the chief stepped closer. You picked the wrong damn family. Jack flinched. Look him in the eye and apologize. Jack's lips trembled, his whole body shook. He had no way out. He had humiliated, abused, and terrorized innocent people for years. And now, the whole city was about to watch his downfall. Jack took a slow, shuddering breath. And then, he finally did what he never thought he'd have to do. He looked up into the eyes of the man he had just thrown to the ground. The young man's expression was unreadable. No anger, no fear, just a quiet, steady power. And in a voice barely above a whisper, Jack forced the words out. I'm sorry. The chief's jaw tightened. That's not good enough. Jack's breath caught. You're not just apologizing to my son. The chief took a step back, scanning the scene. You're apologizing to every single person you've ever abused. Jack felt his chest tighten because he knew there was no apology that could erase what he had done. And the city, they were about to find out everything. Within an hour, Jack's name was trending on social media. Within 6 hours, body cam footage from past stops leaked online. Within 24 hours, Jack Simmons was fired. A full investigation was launched into his career. Dozens of victims came forward, revealing years of racial profiling, harassment, and abuse. The same cops who once covered for him. Now, they turned their backs. No one wanted to be associated with him. He was toxic, a disgrace, a pariah. His entire career gone, his entire reputation shattered. And the worst part, he would never wear a badge again. Jack Simmons was finished, and justice had finally been served.